Hi, and welcome to the Turning Stone Show. Today we feature Turning Stones After Dark. Today's show is an adult conversation on human sexuality, and it is intended for a mature audience. If you're uncomfortable with this discussion, this might be an episode that you want to save for later. I'm David Marsh, and here with me, as always, is Jesse Farrell and Justin Mamon. Our topic today is naked sexuality, revealing our creative life force. Our guest today is Mukee Okan. She's an author, a teacher, and an all-around educator transforming the conversation on sex. Recently, we got the chance to spend some time with her and hear her tell her story and talk about human sexual energy.
I describe myself that I do sex coaching, and then I identify the fields that I've trained in. So I'm actually first generation Australian. My parents are Lutheran, so for them, that was the Lutheran thing. I didn't really know about that until they found out I was having sex when I was a teenager. My mum ended up saying I couldn't live in the house. I had two younger sisters if I didn't live by their morals. I knew it was okay, and I knew that my parents were just reacting like that because they'd never had any education. That was the way they'd been brought up. I went to university, did architecture, started taking drugs, left, moved to the country with my boyfriend, get off drugs, built a house, I had a beautiful baby. You know, this is like all over a 10-year span, right? A Swami used to come to the community house and teach a weekly yoga class. Well, I thought all that spiritual stuff was a bunch of bull. A year later, I went and moved into the ashram in that tradition in New Zealand. So I was given the name Swami Muktananda Saraswati. So Swami means master of oneself. They give you the degree at the beginning rather than at the end. And then Muktananda means the bliss of spiritual freedom. The missing ingredients was sexuality. Many world religious leaders over long periods of time have said, when you control the sexuality of the people, you control the people. And so there's just so much ignorance perpetuated from the fear of one's own energy. Sexual energy is the driving force in every cell and atom in creation. It's the thing that has us get out of bed in the morning. So procreation, that is the driving force of our creativity. When we actually free our life force, meaning free ourselves from all of the ways that we're against our own energy, then we're free to express what we actually came here to do on the planet.
So Mookie, we come into the world naked. We're infants. We have a natural curiosity and exploration. Somewhere along our growing and our learning, we're given information by the adults in our life that there are certain things that we should and shouldn't do. We get introduced to the concept of shame. Talk to us about these cultural things that come into our presence, maybe the narrative we've been given in a religious sense that you shouldn't do something because the divine will be angry with you, or something that's negative there that we need to uphold a certain standard. What is it about the human body that people find they need to regulate and control, and what is it about shame that we're given?
That's such a big description, really, of what's happening on the planet today and many of the world's traditions and religions and New Age stuff and Old Age stuff and everything. And so really, somewhere along the line, in many of the different religions, people discover that when our sexual energy is controlled, then we are totally controllable. So we actually give up our creativity, our naturalness, so forth and so on. But the incredible thing is, you see, when we're in the womb, and because of modern technology, the ultrasound, you know, these days, all of the technicians, or many technicians who work in ultrasound, know that we are in fact self-pleasuring in the womb because they can see in there, particularly in the last 3 months. So you imagine the space is quite small. And so it's very natural for us to be in pleasure in the womb. And why? Because we don't have any beliefs or constructs or any ideas against anything.
Yeah.
We are an open space, an open physical structure. And then, depending on where we're born into, the country, the economic group, the religion, so forth and so on, then there's image making that begins to happen, which is really perpetuated by how our parents or whoever raised us were raised themselves, and then before that and before that. So you can see it goes way back into human history, the ignorance that perpetuates shame about being completely natural.
Yeah. Something you said, you talked about creativity, and you talked about a release of energy. Sexuality is a procreative, and you talked about that in the piece, where it releases creativity and it is procreative. Address that subject. Talk about that a little bit.
Okay, so we all know that procreation is the driving force of everything, like everything in life, all humans or animals, like plants, stones, everything is in the act of reproducing itself. So you just think of all the cells and the atoms of everything in creation. And so the fuel behind that is the sexual life force energy. So rather than separating it, saying this is sex and sexual energy and then this is the life force, it's all one and the same thing. So procreation, it is our most precious gift of being alive and for everything being alive. And so therefore it's the fuel for how we express ourselves, whether it's our creativity in our family, in our business, so forth and so on. So it's not just about painting or writing.
Yeah.
You know, it's our creative expression of our life.
So the artwork that we saw in that piece, that is artwork that you've done. Now you get an inspiration, you get an idea, and you put it into print or paint. Talk about that creative force that you bring to your artwork.
Well, I usually have the artwork for a specific purpose or intent. So I definitely had a shift in my growing up, in my own like evolution, where rather than painting like sad old depressed things, I can remember drawings I did as a teenager of, you know, all the hangdog kind of, all that stuff we go through, you know, when we're teens, to then when I actually started learning like what I call real knowledge, which is from many different spiritual traditions. And then I discovered that if my intent is to experience expansion, or that anyone viewing my art has an experience of expansion, then there's a whole different feeling in the creation. So I might start with a little drawing, and then I'll start painting, and then I like to say it paints itself.
Yeah. When you're expressing yourself creatively, is it both an expression of yourself and you're envisioning how your audience is going to be experiencing that while you're doing it?
Not necessarily about thinking about the audience, because once I enter into that space, and I'm sure many people have experienced it, it is a very like single focus. Time disappears, and you just feel great. You know, that's my own energy. That's my.
I call it bliss.
Connected to everything, right?
Bliss.
Yeah.
When you're coaching with people, they come to you because they have a legitimate problem. There's something that they need help with or education with. You shared with me while we met that you have had the opportunity to share with people. You told me a story about someone who had not consummated their marriage for a very long time, and you also told me about other people with handicaps that hadn't had any experience. Share with the audience some of the things that you've been able to help people through.
Well, it's interesting because people think they have a problem, and really it's lack of education. So there's, first of all, I'm always reassuring whoever comes to see me for whatever their issue is, that there's absolutely nothing wrong with them. It's just that they, like myself, when, you know, as I was learning and growing, and that's a never-ending journey for me too, I just hadn't had enough education in that arena, and especially in sexual intimacy, because of all of the blocks and repression and shame that we're exposed to about it. It might be all over TV and magazines and the internet, but it's such a narrow perspective on what sex is. And like, just to say the word sex is like scary, right? For a lot of
awesome.
people.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like there's public and private, right? So we have that sort of perception of who we are and who we can be, and we divide ourselves into these two spheres. And I know there's benefits to that. There's boundaries and stuff like that. How do you think people like almost separate their selves? Like they almost keep them. That's the shame, like they put that side of themselves very, very private. Like they don't express their whole selves all the time.
Well, being about transforming the conversation about sex, you see, unless you're in a non-judgmental space or where there's some freedom to even have a conversation about what your concerns are or your desires, for instance, with your partner, we don't really get any training in just being able to be vulnerable and free in our conversation. And then the more that we think about it and get all anxious about it, then it becomes like this thing. And to, a lot of couples find that when they actually open up to each other and share something real about their fears or what they've been afraid to express, then everything just changes just like that.
Yeah.
I know one of the things that was really helpful for me in one of the workshops that I did with you was being able to see where I fell on the spectrum sexually. So, growing up, I knew at an early age, around 4 to 6 years old, that I was sexually attracted to men. And I didn't even realize until actually a couple of years ago that going through puberty, I never thought about women. I only thought about guys going through puberty. And yet I had no context for what it meant to be gay, so to speak. And so, I got married, did the traditional thing, then came out during my marriage, got divorced, came out as a gay man, lived that life for a bit. And then I was introduced to you and I did a workshop with you. And what really shifted for me in that workshop was seeing where I fell on the spectrum. And so what was interesting for me is knowing that while humans, and I'll speak for myself, while I had a certain preference, which was to be in relationship with a man, or preferably to have sex with a man, I could, under the right circumstances, actually be engaged in having sex with a woman and be completely fine with that. And that looks completely different for different people. So like for me, for the scenario would be that I would be engaged in having sex with a man, with a woman, where it was an engaged, the three of us together in that spectrum. So what I walked away from that was a couple of things. One, realizing and recognizing that the label that I put on myself to be a gay man really didn't fit, that I did not fit as a gay man. And while I appreciate my gay brotherhood, and I have many, many gay friends, and I still oftentimes say I'm gay, just because it's easy to
It's a social
understand.
identity.
Right, it's a social identity. But where I really find myself is on that other end of the spectrum, where it would be more amnisexual, where I would fall under that circumstance. And that looks different with different agreements for different people. The other thing that I really got out of that around my own sexuality is appreciating anatomy for both men and women and the differences that we all have when it comes to our anatomy, and how, I had never even thought about that before, and how really it allowed me to respect and appreciate those differences that we have, and be able to have a whole new appreciation and understanding for being connected, and at the same time knowing that we're all so very different and unique. Can you talk a little bit about those differences? And I think that's where a lot of shame comes in, especially with men, but I'm certain that it could be even with women. With men, it's always about size, whether it's too small or too large or not enough, or you come too quickly or you don't, whatever. It's like there's always this So can you talk a little bit about that and how we're so beautiful and unique in our own way,
That's beautiful, Jesse. So, yeah, like, first of all, our body, man's body, a woman's body, is a miracle. It's like miraculous. And doesn't matter what your sexual preference is. So that's one of the beautiful things I know in those sessions is realizing doesn't matter what your sexual preference is. It's not like it's this and end of story and everybody else is wrong. And like everyone has their own preferences in everything. And so in relationship to genital anatomy, it's such a taboo. First of all, men are demonized for their sexuality, and they're demonized for their genital anatomy, really. And then for women, we don't even know hardly a thing about how our genital anatomy functions, or all of the parts, or we haven't looked for ourselves.
Well, you think about that, just right there, that pause for a moment, is like men are all out there.
Right.
There's something to demonize, and then women are inward, and so there's this unknown exploration that hasn't happened, like to really love and appreciate women for who they are.
Yeah, and so the key is for women, first of all, to totally know themselves. Well, we're always going to be a mystery anyway. We're never going to know ourselves fully. And the same for the men is to know fully yourself. So your whole genital anatomy is a natural part of you and not something that's demonized or emasculated and so forth and so on. So something happens for men when they discover the magic of like, here's this is the thing that sparks everything in creation.
Yeah.
Whether it's nothing to do with just about birthing children.
Right.
But, a man's genital anatomy, his penis is what sparks everything in creation. And then similarly for us women, until we upgrade and enhance our image of ourselves, because our whole thing's about our body, right? That's like the big thing for us. Is like, am I too fat or too thin, all that.
Right.
So even to have a relationship with one's anatomy as a woman changes her life.
So powerful.
There's a few things that came up there for me. We've created a dichotomy of homosexuality and heterosexuality, and that is more of a social identification. But as far as human sexuality goes, just as with every dichotomy that we come up with in our minds, the truth and the reality is that there's a broad spectrum, and that as people's sexual preferences really fall all along that spectrum. So that was the first thing that came up for me with that. And the second thing that came up was there's a website and a psychologist, he's a relationship coach named Jason Gaddis, and he recently started a podcast series called Cock Talk.
Gonna have to look it up.
Yeah, really, really good stuff.
Yeah.
Basically men being extremely vulnerable about their sexuality. And the point you made about the male genitals being a source and a force of life, he talks about in the show about how if men really start, and I've experienced this, if you tune into your own cock, your own penis, it's almost like a barometer for decisions and choices that you make in your life.
Absolutely.
You could feel it when you're anxious, you can feel it when you're relaxed, you can feel it when you're excited. And obviously there's the old adage of like, don't make decisions with your head, right, with the wrong head. But actually he's talking about a totally different wisdom. He's saying that there's a wisdom in actually paying attention and being connected with your cock.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's the source, our anatomy. Like that's where for some people know about the chakras. So the first chakra, that is considered to be where all your sexual life force energy is sourced from.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we're cutting off through our guilt, feelings of guilt and shame, feeling fully this area, we're cutting off our life force. So I like to say to men that your whole body becomes your cock space, and for women your whole body becomes your pussy space because
Right.
it's our natural body wisdom
Yeah.
that we're connecting to.
So great.
You have a theme in your work called the divine design,
Yes.
and you also have a theme about becoming your orgasm's best friend.
Yes.
There's a spiritual connection there, and you alluded to it when you were talking about energies and the different chakras and all that. Please give us more education about that.
Orgasm, first and foremost, is for our health and well-being. So just in a 24-hour cycle, all the metabolic wastes that are generated, orgasm clears that out. So I've seen science
And by
reports.
orgasm, you're not necessarily talking about ejaculation.
I'm just talking about anything that moves the life force energy through the
Okay.
body. It could involve ejaculation, but it doesn't need to be, for instance, sexual intercourse, because often we think, oh, sex, that just means penetration, sex of some description. But even in our own self-pleasuring, so it doesn't rely on being with a partner just for yourself, because that's, like against a lot of beliefs and things that you shouldn't touch yourself, you shouldn't pleasure yourself, which we're all doing anyway when we come out of the womb, and we're in the womb, we come out of the womb,
Sure.
until we're like slapped and, oh, don't do that. So the more that we allow ourselves to feel that and reframe that orgasm's first for our health and well-being, there are all the other good things that come from it, like our marriages and relationships and connection, are the goodies that come, but they're the extras, you could say.
So I've heard, and also I've experienced this, where ejaculation is referred to in some tantric traditions as a, like you said, a release of energy, and that actually in doing that you're lowering your vibration, whatever kind of philosophy or perspective on that. But I'd say I've paid attention to that, where I've noticed, it feels good, but, you want to fall asleep right after, right? A lot of the times.
I do.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So
my wife calls it my rhino shot.
Yeah. So I mean, we're having this discussion,
Yeah.
so we should talk about our. I think should talk about our real experiences. I guess elaborate around how to harness the energy, rather than, I think what a lot of men learn to do is release it because they're uncomfortable with the intensity of the sensitivity that's taking place. So we want to release it because we can't handle
Focus.
that, right?
I'm really glad that you brought that up, because in the like sexual new age space of tantra and this and
Right.
that, is for men to come or not to come. Like, this is the
It's
question.
it's a big.
And so that whole thing about in tantra, it says blah blah blah. Look, me personally, and this is my opinion, that's as worthless as anybody else's. That's the teacher's opinion. Some teacher's opinion.
Translation.
Who picked it up from somewhere or other. So to answer your question, how do you be an energy gain rather than feeling like
an energy
you've had
drain.
Energy drain, yeah. So you see, when we're approaching a sexual experience, just because we're like feeling like really horny and, oh my God, I gotta have it, and you're all tense, and you have like a bit of friction, and then you're a little poof, right? And then you roll over and go to sleep. Well, I'm sure for a guy, I've come across plenty of men where it's like rubbing really hard to feel something, and then poof, and that was it, right?
Yeah.
So there's really no extra energy generated. So the main coaching that I like to give is so that the more that you allow for a man or for a woman to allow yourself to charge through feeling fully the pleasure of everything that's happening in the body, and letting go of being outcome driven. So you're just allowing yourself to charge and relax, and then charge and charge, and charge and charge.
And so how much of that has to do with performance and the entire concept of performance and sex?
Well, I would say in our culture, performance-driven sex, is the norm.
Right.
Yeah. And that's just
And what
from,
would be not the norm then?
well, see, that's just from ignorance and lack of education, like thinking, or we just think, oh, yeah, well, this is how you do it, and this is how you have sex, and this is normal. And then you, sometime along the line, I go, oh, a lot of people, especially the older they get, well, there must be more.
So it
It's a
is. It's like
healthy
it's kind of
version.
like labeled as vanilla sex. Like you're very vanilla, and like it's always got to be the same way. There's no change or variety in what you do, and so it's like beginning to engage in that question. Actually, is like, what else could
Right.
I do to be outside of my box of how I think sex is like this?
Right.
What else could I do to actually explore being outward focused and have my sexual energy be this flow that happens with either myself or with my partner or with others around me?
So I would say, first of all, it's really relaxation is such a key. So I'm just going, two people, they come together, doesn't matter that man, 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 woman, woman, woman. And so rather than just like biting on each other, and we've all had those experiences where like, yeah, it's like fast
So
and
great.
furious and all that.
Movie
and
sex.
there's nothing wrong with that.
That's
But-
getting off the airplane sex. That's right.
Or on the
But it's
airplanes.
like you're trying to generate the feeling and sensation by fast and furious. I'm just going to use that terminology. So for all of us, our sexual arousal really depends on the parasympathetic nervous system being activated first. That's the relaxation response for
Right.
men and for women.
Yes.
And so if we allow ourselves to be with the other, enjoying just the pleasure of, first of all, laying next to each other, starting to touch and caress. And there's a point where then the connection or the energy just takes over. So it doesn't mean it's all got to be soft and slow and all that. Like there's a point where it just goes wild. If you allow it, but it's not from making.
It's almost
not
like a
a-
development of a movie. Like there's the starting off of the movie, there's the peak that you get to, and then there's the coming back down as well. Like it's so important to have that before and after
And
in that sexual experience.
I'm thinking too, what about the role of the heart? Especially when you're talking about two people. Because I feel like if you're talking about self-pleasure, then you're talking about connecting to your own heart and being in your own body and fully feeling your own sensations and exploring that. And then when you talk about a relationship in two people, you're talking about, a lot more vulnerability there. And I think that vulnerability is what drives that tension that you talk about, that fast and furious, is because people don't want to feel that vulnerability of actually slowing down and feeling whatever insecurities they have and sharing their bodies with one another. So how do you work with people on sexual relationships, on opening their heart to one another?
Yes, so I would say that the key is how you first spoke about your own connection to yourself. So you bring yourself fully, your presence. So there's just the simplest things that one can do when you realize, oh, I'm like thinking about, oh my God, I got to get up early, or like, is this going to work, or anything. For us women, it's our to-do list. I don't know what you guys have. Am I hard, or am I soft, or am I big enough? All that jazz. So the instant you become aware that, oh, I'm like out here, I'm like thinking about it, is just coming back to feeling in the body. Just simple like that. So you don't have to think about, at the instant you're thinking about, oh, is my heart open? And no, just let go of all that. I just said, let go.
That's more of the same. It's like,
Yeah.
am I in my heart? Like, and
Yeah.
how much do you think that's different between men and women? Like, women want more of that
Oh,
because
that's
that's
what
how
they
they
say.
label connection, and men totally don't want to go there because it opens
that's
up this
just-
whole vulnerable
No,
space.
that's just a
It's a
stereotype
myth, yeah.
thing. And so when women
Maybe.
when women are saying, oh, I just have to have a man with an open heart, but not that one, not that one, not that one, right? So it's the same mental, it's using the mind and the thinking to separate rather than connect.
Everything that we do inside of sex is about procreation. And so
Oh, yeah, good
all
question.
about
Creativity.
life and creativity and all that. And so a lot of people will question them like, well, that's why being gay or being lesbian is not, that's just not normal. Like there's no way because you're not allowing yourself to procreate. So can you speak to a little bit about, obviously those are concerns that a lot of people have, and obviously there's lots of solutions that people have as well. I mean, I think it's, what's always kind of interesting for me is that people learn that I have children. It's like, wow, how did that happen? I'm like, well, I was married for,
Yeah.
I was married for 11 years and I had sex twice. That's
Yeah.
how it happened.
He's definitely the most interesting man.
Okay, that's great. I'm glad you brought that up. Because first of all, procreation doesn't just mean having children, first of all. So what I like to, because I hear like sex teachers like dissing the procreative thing, and look, procreation, it's like every expression of you.
Right.
So once you expand your awareness of procreation and the role that it has in ensuring that life continues on the planet, then you can start to open up to it really exploring sex for pleasure. That's like the next
And isn't it also
evolution.
inside of like finding what your gift is as part of procreation?
Absolutely, yes.
And you can find that inside of your sexual energy because that's where your creativity comes from.
Yeah,
and so that's your gift to the world.
Yeah, as long as you got anything against procreation, your sexual energy, your sexual expression, you are actually restricting discovering. People are always saying like, what am I meant to be doing and all this and that. What you're meant to be doing is like freeing yourself of every thought, everything you have against yourself.
That's so great.
So then in that exploration of, okay, I can explore sex for pleasure, that's actually a good thing. That's sort of, I see that like as the next step. And just exploring it for pleasure's sake, which doesn't mean, whether you're a monogamous couple, same-sex couple, doesn't matter. So really having intent, okay, we're just going to explore it for pleasure.
Yeah.
And then there's a natural thing that starts to happen, because then there's sexual energy exchange for transformation. I'm actually going to say enlightenment,
That's
which
good.
is beyond actually even sex for pleasure.
Yeah.
And
Say more about that. What does that mean?
Yeah.
You see, inbuilt into our anatomy and physiology, well, we all know we have dormant compartments of the brain. So in this real science of Tantra, what all of the practices of postures and pranayama and relaxation and so forth and so on and so forth, are to start building new pranic pathways into the dormant areas of the brain. And so when you are doing scientific systematic practices, that's one of the things that I guide people through. Once you start doing systematic practices that are starting to strengthen and balance and harmonize the nervous system, you start to have like quite intense experiences of your life force energy, whether it's solo, and then with a partner, it's like even more intense. And so it's like recognizing the force of creation in science. So you talked about the divine design. So this is the divine design, to fully experience our life force energy. So if we're cutting it off already here at the genitals, at the first chakra, what we're doing is just really slowing down our own evolution.
Right.
And we're not able to contribute what we really came here to do for yet, because it's never like it's all over.
I feel like part of the conversation around sex and procreation has to do, and this is not the topic of conversation for the show, but has to do with like economics too, like population and that kind of thing. And I feel like that's definitely on people's minds, at least to some degree. When I think about it, exploring my sexuality, there's part of me that wants to go explore it with every woman that I find attractive, right? But I'm in a committed monogamous relationship. So talk about, like, for the audience, like, how can people be guided to explore these, like, bursting sexual desires within that context of committed relationship?
Well, first of all, one of the things that we do when we're in a total like devotion to
Yeah.
each other for this lifetime, often we will fall into the trap of think, well, I know exactly how they're going to react. I know what they're going to say. I know how they're going to respond. Like, if I, fill in the blank, whatever that is.
Yeah.
So imagine, like, we don't even know ourselves.
Right.
Right? That's like the complete mystery. So imagine every time you are interacting with your partner, it's like, who is this being?
Yes.
So great.
It's like when you have I know you've raised children and you've raised children too. It's like, remember the wonder with your child. You go, wow, like, who are you? I know as a grandmother, I go, oh my God, like, who are you? Do you know about my grandson?
What about people, I mean, do you run into just simple, like very basic, fundamental personality differences where there are just certain people as part of their personalities, they just don't have an interest or a desire to really explore that deeply sexually?
Well, what I found, it's more that say one half of a partnership is wanting more of like whatever it is.
Right.
They just haven't found a way to communicate it, whatever it is, in a way that lands over there. Or there's a certain like persecuting thing, tormenting thing going on, like unless, oh, well, you're not willing to.
There's like a pursuer, and then there's like a pursued kind of.
Yeah, and it's just, again, see, it comes down to education again, because there's so much material out there. I really love Esther Perel's work for people in relationships, because it's all about how do you keep desire alive, in committed relating.
And I think so often it's again being vulnerable and having a conversation with your partner, because it has nothing to do with your partner.
Right.
It has everything to do like what you want to communicate inside. And so that may open up this whole amazing conversation with your partner that creates this wonder and exploration that would never have happened without actually engaging in a conversation about that.
Exactly, yeah. And so again, like, rather than, you know what's going to happen the next split second. I mean, just like look at the last 15 years of our relationship. So it's letting go of your own beliefs and philosophy about the whole thing and being willing to do exactly what Jessie said. And then, just on a practical level, sometimes I'll recommend to a couple, look, just go to a bookshop, go to the sex section, look at like what catches your eye, get a few books, take them home and like take turns like reading a page out loud to each other and then having a conversation.
That's sometimes the easiest way to start the conversation.
Right.
Yeah. And I feel like that is ideal, right? That's the ideal, that's the recommendation. And I know from my own experience, and I'm sure there are other people out there in relationships where one partner might be really open to that and another partner might be like, I don't feel comfortable doing that, right? I'm comfortable in this box. I don't really feel comfortable leaving it. I'm happy here, and I'm happy doing missionary. I'm happy. You're great in bed. I don't want to do anything else. This is it. This is as far as I want to go.
One of the tips I give to people is, well, just get those books anyway. Have them hanging around the house, and they surely think I'm having a look in there.
Have them be in the bathroom for reading material.
Don't give up. It's not already predicting.
There's a trilogy of books that I find I love, and it's by Ayn Rand. Ayn Rand actually wrote them under her other name, and I forget what even that name is. But it's all about Sleeping Beauty from a complete different perspective. Definitely outside of the box. That's a lot of fun to read at nighttime with your partner, and I will definitely engage. And so it's an old story that we've all heard, but it's told very, very differently. That's worth reading. It's very interesting.
And then there's the classics like Nancy Friday's books, where women wrote in their sexual fantasies. I mean, it's probably 30 years old, those books, and they're Men in Love, where men wrote them in. And it's just really amazing for men and women just to read. Oh, wow. Oh, well, okay, what I think about it. It's like...
Yeah, which is totally normal. So that leads me into fantasy. What's the role of fantasy in this whole dynamic? And, a lot of times you hear people talk about healthy fantasy, unhealthy fantasy. How does fantasy both connect people to their sexuality, and how does it disconnect people from their
Oh my
sexuality?
God, can I add something to that?
Yeah.
So that's actually what really began my own sexual exploration, was that. Is like I had shame around fantasy, and there was something wrong with what I was thinking about during sex, that I had to think about this to be able to even ejaculate and get off. And so I really began my sexual exploration, doing workshops and different things like that because of that. And it wasn't until actually doing your workshop that came full circle for me. And you said something you may not even remember, is that oftentimes when you're having a fantasy of someone, you could switch the context, again, shift into it being the biggest compliment that you're actually thinking about someone else in a fantasy to help your pleasure and your exploration. And I was like, oh wow, like you could really, like, it actually shifts our sexuality, whether it's with women or with men, to actually really respecting that in a whole different way, even inside of a fantasy. And it really shifted that for me. So anyway, go ahead. It was like, I just was reminded of that. I was like, that was my whole sexual exploration of fantasy. That's where it started.
Right. Well, I would say, look, fantasy is like a normal, natural, human aspect of us. And if it becomes like an issue, it's only if that's the only way that you can experience your sexuality, which would be the same as like viewing pornography. So, some people, they can't engage anymore with the real
human beings,
with a real human being, because that's the only way. They kind of like train themselves. So as I'll use myself as an example. So because I have my Nancy Friday books. They're really old, yellow, weathered books. I have them in a drawer by my bed. And sometimes if I want to have an orgasm in the morning when I wake up, and sometimes I'm distracted and I realize I'm not feeling anything when I'm touching myself. And I'm thinking, and I just get out one of the Nancy Friday books, and I might just read like 3 lines, and that's enough. And I have an orgasm. So we all have our own unique manner that we relate to sexual fantasy, but the main thing is, like, if we think, oh, it's really bad, I'm like, I shouldn't be thinking that, and this and that, like that's...
Yeah, then it starts to become dark, right? Then
right.
That's when it
Well, there's
becomes
also
dark.
a judgment around it, and shame, which we already have.
Exactly,
and so...
That's why her books are so great, because some of the fantasy go, oh my God, like, how could they've got like a 10-page thing here. This is like... It's just to see how the human mind functions.
Yeah. That's what's fascinating for me about that.
Sexual abuse? What about like unhealthy sexual expression? Because we're talking about sexual expression from a procreative, positive standpoint. And what about, do you think that's the result of repression and shame and everything we're talking about? Like, have you worked with it?
Oh, so, well, men or women who've experienced sexual abuse, when they're growing up or when they're young teens, or any experience actually where it's been against their own free will, that's in the dark. And so the more that we respect the divine design, the more that we respect ourselves, and, for men to really respect themselves and their whole body and honor their genital anatomy, same for women, then, as you shared, when in that education, how you just had a greater respect for all men and women. Yeah. So I just see the key to transforming the darkness and ignorance and shame and guilt, and then actually going against another person, especially a young person. It would end, it would transform. As long as it's brought out of the dark into the light.
Yes, of course. Great. Yeah.
So, you guys ready to talk about orgasm?
Yeah.
Sure.
Perfect. Okay. So,
it's like the moment I've been waiting for.
Orgasm.
The climax of the show.
Oh,
there you go.
Okay. Well, depends how long the show's going for. Okay.
What I find somewhat comical about orgasm, especially in discussing orgasm with men, is that most men have the belief that orgasm only happens as ejaculation.
Right.
And so I was recently in a sexual experience with a man, and afterward, and I was very orgasmic for me. Like, I had many, many orgasms throughout the session. And afterwards, he's like, he was like, did you enjoy that? I'm like, yeah. I'm like, why do you ask? He's like, because you weren't hard. I'm like, and you didn't come. I'm like, so you based all of me not enjoying our time together by me not being hard or me not actually coming. So did you not hear all the many orgasms that I had? He's like, you mean many orgasms or many? I'm like, yeah, the many orgasms that I experienced in our time together. So can you say a little bit about, like, just educate a little bit about what it means to be able to experience full body orgasm, and how do you actually develop yourself to awaken that erotic energy, oftentimes that it's called, to experience full body orgasm, and a lot of people use that as edging or different forms of, bringing that energy in that you can tap into very, very quickly. And for myself, I find it way more satisfying than ejaculation. I mean, I would rather have full body orgasm or many orgasms throughout my body anytime over ejaculation. Like, hands down, let's not even think about it.
Yeah, well, I would say with that partner asking you all those questions, well, you've had the education that there's many different types of orgasm that a man can have.
Engage with that with him.
Yeah, so
and it's always like, when that comes up, I love seeing the wonder in guys' eyes, like, oh, that's actually possible. Like, I don't even know how to do that. Like, what do I do to actually experience that? Like, I want some of that.
Yeah, and then another myth that fits in there too is that when a man ejaculates, that it's all over.
Right.
So that's also part of the lack of education for men. And
because that's where it stops for most men. It's like, it's done. You just go to sleep or whatever.
Right, and then so many women think, oh, he just ejaculated, it's all over. But that's so not true, as you know. So, the breath is such an important part of it. So it's like just this little simple meditation where you drop your awareness from feeling the actual physical sensation of the breath in the nostrils, feel everything relax, then you drop your awareness to the navel. This is a self-practice, actually. And then we used a particular point in the perineum for you as men, and the entrance to the cervix for women. But just imagine that you're breathing in and out of
like a channel.
That point. No, just directly in
like
and out. Yeah,
Okay.
So first you start here because you can physically feel it. Because some people say, well, how do I be aware of every breath in and out? So it helps you feel the physical sensation in the nostrils. Then the body just relaxes and you feel your belly let go. Then you breathe in and out of here. It's just stages, but you could then you just go down to, you could just be in the whole genital area. So a man could imagine he's breathing in and out of his penis, or that point in the perineum. A woman can imagine she's breathing just in and out of her whole vulva, vagina space, or in and out of the point in the cervix. So something happens because it makes you drop your attention, and then because the life force energy is coming in through the breath, that's what brings it into the body, then you become aware actually of all of the subtle sensations that are there all of the time. And when you were having the experience of many orgasms with softness, not with an erection, you're just feeling what's there naturally.
Yeah.
And it's amped up, in an experience with another person.
One of the ways that Jesse and I met is I would come to his studio. There would be he does meditation evenings here. And so I met Jesse, and then eventually I had Jesse do some body work. We worked on kind of opening up the hip area. And at the time, I had kind of my own, is working on my body and opening up my sexuality. Oh, am I going to be cheating on my girlfriend doing this, right? That came up. And Jesse never actually touched my genitals. But in that work, for almost a week after, and this will sound weird to anybody who's never experienced this, but I literally felt like I was breathing through this root part, on a regular basis. I can actually feel air channeling up there when I would breathe. And it was a really just incredible sensation, and it kind of went from here and opened up my whole heart.
And that was
after-
really the practice, was to begin to get to that space to use that creative energy for
Yeah.
a life force for other things
Yeah.
in Justin's life. And so to be able to, I think it is then taking, when you have a little opening like that, take that and practice it more and more and get
Yeah.
more into that feeling, because that's what starts to develop that muscle where you actually experience more and more and more of that.
I
and
feel like
doing
when
it with
that's
your partner.
contracted, I feel like when that sexual energy is contracted, which since that point in time, I definitely have felt that almost like what I would call a portal kind of close up. But I feel like when it's contracted certainly out of fear.
Hmm.
In opening it, there's not just a sense of opening in your body, but literally opening to everything.
Yeah.
There's just that
To life
sense of
force.
like opening
right.
to
The
life.
divine.
Yeah. We scare ourselves to that state of restriction and closure, and that's why, like, relax. I just say relax.
Yeah.
So that work, on that whole area there, especially for a man, because one of the things that happens when you're a teenage boy, many men have told me, like, you have spontaneous erections, right? When it just has a mind of its own, you could say.
You don't have to be a teenager to experience
You don't
that.
have to be there,
You
right?
can still
And
be in your 40s.
Okay, fantastic. And so, unless you're in some place that celebrates that,
Well, for a man,
Spontaneous
it's always
erection?
celebrated. Well, maybe not.
well, in some cultures,
Yeah, that's true.
I know, like, a lot of young men have told me, well, then they get embarrassed about
Oh,
it,
sure.
and then you got to,
Especially
like,
in school or young.
yeah. So you automatically you feel that erection coming, and then you got to, like, block it off. So that's why that area, like, when you work on that area for a man, produces such rich results.
Yeah.
And that's why there's it's another whole topic, but that's why, like, there's such a mixed line in massage and all that, because for men,
Yeah.
they haven't experienced that opening because they have been so repressed. And so then, a hard-on happens, and then there's like, well, I've got to do something about it, rather than just actually being with, I've got a hard-on, and actually celebrating that I have a hard-on. There's nothing to do necessarily with it except just acknowledge I have a hard-on, and it's totally okay.
Yeah.
Mookie, what is the one thing that you want people to know about their human sexuality?
Your sexuality is natural, beautiful, sacred, and just keep learning and growing and educating yourself until you're, like, completely in love for the men, with your entirety, your whole being, your penis. For the women, say completely in love with yourself, including your vulva, your vagina, that beautiful feminine space of creation.
So great.
Awesome. Now is the time in the show where we like to have a turning stone, something to set your intention for the week. And with today's turning stone, we go to Jesse.
So the question to practice this week is, what does your soul desire to experience in this moment, and this moment, and in this moment of time that would have it be fulfilled? So today's conversation was all about human sexuality, which is one of my favorite conversations, because, like Mookie said, so much of our creative life force actually comes from our sexual from our creativity through our sexuality. And so this week, a practice for a turning stone practice is see where you can explore your own sexuality. How did you develop your sexuality? What are some beliefs or behaviors that maybe got created for you at an early age? And then also, this is going to test you, spend at least a few minutes in the mirror this week. And I would suggest 5 minutes to really stretch yourself, completely naked, and enjoy exploring and looking at your own body and loving every single part of your body, like all of it. You're so miraculous in all that you are and how you're designed. You're a man for a reason. You're a woman for a reason. So spend some time this week in your exploration, some vulnerable time with yourself, naked in front of the mirror, being completely vulnerable and loving every single part of you, and even connect with your own eyes in the mirror, saying, I love you. I love all of you. And remember, this is a show about questions and questioning. It is not a show about answers. So nothing we say here is the truth. It is up to each of us to discover our own sexual truth.
Join us each week on The Turning Stone Show as we continue the journey of conversations.
Subscribe and get in touch with us. Stay connected and join in the conversation.